back.
Can you hear me?
We can hear you as well, so that's perfect.
Beautiful.
Yeah. So I've just started the recording, Rhys. What I'm going to do is I'm going to say a few things to start off, and then hand over to you, and you can start your presentation.
Beautiful. Sounds good.
Perfect. Okay. Well, welcome everybody to our 187th Betting Online Sports Economics Seminar. It's a great pleasure to have Rhys Murrian joining us from Monash University and joining us from Saturday. So joining us from the future. He's going to present on trends, key players, and the adoption and use of experienced goods. Shortly before he does, I just wanted to spend a couple of moments semi-administratively sharing things. And if folk are able to let people in while I do that, I'm just going to share my screen. So I want to go first of all to the outline for the next few months. So hopefully you might have seen on social media, we've got a set of talks lined up, starting today with Rhys. Then our next scheduled talk is on the 24th of January. The reason there isn't a talk next week is that I thought I had a commitment next Friday, which has been moved back into February. And so there's now a free spot. So if anyone does want to present, they have some work they'd like to present next week, please do let me know, because then we can fill the slot next week. If not, we'll return on January the 24th, and we have David Castells-Quintana presenting. Just to also note that there is a conference abstract deadline coming up quite imminently, which is for Dennis Coates' conference in Maryland, Baltimore, University of Maryland, Baltimore. And that is a very interesting looking conference. I would encourage you to search up the details on that. One thing that I became aware of over the break is that this is a good conference if your research budget is low, because literally all you need to do is get your flight booked over there, because the conference organizers are covering the hotel and food. So please do consider that. Send your abstracts to Dennis, 200 words by January the 20th, so 10 days time. I also want to flag up a conference I'm organising at Boundary Park, which is the home of Oldham Athletic. And if you can see it, it's the picture behind me. I'm just going to share with you the poster that's in place. Hopefully you can see that. Football, finance, analytics, past, present and future. There's an interesting lineup of speakers, including regular guests here. Alex Creamer and Stefan Szymanski will be part of the conference. We're hoping that we will have Avram Grant as our evening event speaker. Many of you may know of him as the former Chelsea manager and West Ham, but also currently the Zambia head coach. We also will have Kieran Maguire, well known for his Price of Football and forensic work on football accounts. We'll have Jack Coles and David Sharp, who are heavily involved at two football league clubs, Bradford and Lincoln City. And it promises to be a really interesting event alongside Christina Philippou, who's been involved in this series as well. If you're interested in attending, please keep your eye out for further announcements. The website to register will soon be working. At the moment, there's no way to register, but you can find information out there. The event is on the 14th, Valentine's Day, 14th February, and goes on into the Saturday the 15th. And if you so desire, you can stay on for the a National League football match taking place once the conference concludes in the afternoon, Oldham Athletic versus Sutton United. So I just wanted to flag that up, and I'm always quite keen to make sure that I am keeping you abreast of potentially interesting events in the world of sports economics. If you have an event, please do always feel free to ply me with the information, and I will share the information here in this forum. Rhys, you've waited long enough, and I'm so thankful you've joined us at 1:30 in the morning for you. Thank you so much for that. The floor is now yours. Please do take away your talk.
Awesome. Thank you for that, James. I'll just quickly share my screen. Just give me a second. Screen. Cool. Can you see that?
Yep, got that.
Beautiful. So hi everyone, James. First, I'd like to thank you, James, just for giving me an opportunity to present at the Roses seminar. It's 1:30 a.m. in the morning here in Melbourne, Australia. So please forgive me if I yawn once or twice. And it's, I guess, the presentation is a little bit different to your normal sports seminar, whereas I'll be focusing on esports, which is, obviously you're more, well, it's a burgeoning type of sport, I guess. So I hope you'll find it quite interesting. The work has been done by myself, my supervisor, Paul Rashke, and another associate supervisor, Klaus Ackerman, all from Monash University. And I should say I'm an economics PhD student there at Monash University. So without further ado, I hope you enjoy the presentation. So I guess I want to start with a little bit of background on what we're trying to do here, or what we're looking at. So the title of the paper itself was about friends, key players, and the adoption and use of experienced goods. And so just as a bit of background, I guess I should start by saying the presence of information asymmetry is a key problem, like within any market, as you're all aware as economists. In many product markets, the quality of the product is only known to the vendor, but it's not visible to any of the buyers. And this is obviously, a typical case for this is experienced goods, where, the product quality only becomes visible to the buyer after the user has purchased and used the good. And examples of certain types of experienced goods are restaurants, cars, sports equipment, and of course, computer games. And as such, is with such experienced goods, consumers often rely on information from friends who have previously purchased the experienced good, so essentially word of mouth. And just, I know this is Nielsen 2016, but this is still the case, up until 2024. Word of mouth recommendations is the most trusted source of information when it comes to product purchases. It's the source that will most likely lead to a product purchase. So word of mouth is quite important when we're looking at, product adoption decisions and usage. So there's a large literature on when we're looking at, I guess, word of mouth and product adoption decisions. There's a large literature on social learning in networks. This has been done to death from the early 2000s. And networks have been important within for consumption behavior as well. So obviously, you'll be pretty familiar with the adage keeping up with the Joneses, which has been looked in the economic literature since 1994. And essentially within this type of literature, networks basically refer to peers. So peers, might be people with similar demographics, individuals living within same neighborhoods, or co-workers. But in most cases, there's no information about direct links between individuals. So that's, the actual networks themselves. So if you're friends with someone, and you have a personal connection with them, it's quite rare to have data on those social networks. So our study does have information on these direct links between individuals, which is obviously, quite an important contribution. The other, I guess, the other like aspect of the literature that look at networks is networks and technology adoption. So for those who are not quite well versed with the network economics literature, technology adoption has been looked at since 1995 by Foster and Rosenweig, and Conley and Udry have a seminal paper which looked at pineapple farming in Ghana, where they did a randomized experiment in a village to see how technology adoption has occurred to have better farming practices. So it's been looked at a fair bit in regards to technology adoption, especially within agricultural and developing economies. And just in more recent literature, PFX has been looked at in terms of product adoption, which is where our paper is. And so there's been papers that have studied the PFX in the market for cell phones, in the market for residential flood insurance, and regarding anime watching as well. And so our data, or our study, we have information about the position of individual friends in the network and the strength of their links. So whether a friend is, an expert or an influencer type friend, or whether they're an old friend. So someone, you've been friends with a long time and you know them quite well, etc. We also have information on a consumer's use of a product, i.e. engagement. So what we also want to look at is, does engagement differ if the purchase was driven by a friend who was an expert influencer or someone who is an old friend, someone who knows you quite well. So this, I guess, is a bit of a summary of the paper itself, and this will give you a bit more understanding or light as to what we're trying to do. So what we have data on the network and game ownership of over 108 million users from the world's largest video game platform. Yeah, that's right. It's 108 million users, which is a whole heap of data. And that's what, this project was a very heavily and technical data heavy project. The study itself analyzes a subsample of around 89,000 players, and we construct a panel data set at the player and week level. And what we really want to get at, and what the study really hones in on what it's trying to do, is we examine whether purchase decisions by direct friends influence a player's own decision to purchase a game. And so we adopt an IV strategy, and we adapt the methodology from Brumaway et al. 2009, which was a seminal paper in the PFX and network economics literature. We also do a bit of a heterogeneity analysis, which explores how peer effects differ by a friend's position in the network, so key player centrality, and the strength of the friendship between the individuals. So, whether an old friend, if an old friend purchases the game, does that influence you to purchase the game? And if a person is an old friend, they're likely to be a good friend, know them quite well, etc., etc. As I said earlier as well, we also want to look at, does the player's engagement with the game differ if the purchase was driven by a key player friend or an old friend? And so, just as a preview of the results for the paper, what we do find is that PFX do increase the adoption of experienced goods, which in our case is computer games. And what we look at is a smaller or independent label game versus a major label game. So a smaller independent label game is a game that is, might be only say one or two people working on this game. There's not a lot of money. It's not backed by a huge company or anything, as compared to a major label game, which has a ton of advertising, backed by a huge corporation. And we see that the size of the PFX is similar between both of these. We also find that the peer effect in terms of adoption is stronger if the friend who purchased the game is an old friend compared to a key player. And this sort of makes a bit of sense. As I was saying earlier, an old friend probably knows you a bit more, had more conversations with you, etc., etc. And so they're likely to, you're probably likely to follow their lead. If they purchase a game, you might think, hey, my old friend or my good friend likes this game, I'll probably like it too. And so you might go ahead and try to purchase that as well. However, one key finding that we do have as well in terms of engagement is that we find engagement with a game is higher if the purchase was not influenced by a friend at all. And why we think that this is an important finding is that it implies that product adoption decisions influenced by friends have minimal effect on a user's product engagement. And this pattern aligns with the concept of taste projection, whereby individuals overestimate their preference alignment with others, leading to a biased social learning and inefficient outcomes. So that's the paper, I guess, in summary, or just a very brief summary. I should have mentioned earlier as well, if there are any questions, if anyone wants to pause and ask any questions, I'm happy to take them during the presentation as I go. Cool. So probably just a bit of further background as well, just regarding the video game industry. I know for a younger cohort or a younger generation, they know how important the video game industry is. But for those who are unaware, the video game industry, in 2022, was valued at $220 billion US. Just for a comparison, that's about 6 to 7 times larger than than Hollywood. So the global movie, the movie industry, which is about US 40 billion worldwide. So the video game industry is quite large. It contributes a lot to the economy, and it is the largest part of the entertainment sector. And it is still forecasted to grow as well. So it is, quite an important thing that I think economists should be taking note of. On top of that as well, there's about 3.09 billion active video game players worldwide, and around 60% of these are male. And so, as I said, it's a growing industry. The younger generations obviously, play a lot of video games. I grew up playing video games. So obviously, like I said, it's quite important to the economy. And within, I guess, economic research, video game data, has largely been overlooked within the literature. However, it does provide, a lot of benefits, such as, the data itself is quite granular. It's at an individual level, it's high frequency. It reveals information on individual social networks. And you can use video game data as digital footprints, and you can use them as proxies for individual behavior or personal traits. So, I do another paper where I use video game data and I look at, individuals' behaviors in terms of cheating, and how they respond to being banned. So there's a lot of, leeway, or there's a lot of work that can be done with this data.
Rhys, can I just interrupt you?
Yeah,
there's a
sure,
question from the audience, if that's okay.
Yeah, sure. Go. Can you please read it out?
No, it's from me.
Go on, Bob,
yeah, thanks. I'm just curious. I know you're going to tell us this later, but what's an inefficient outcome here? What does it mean?
As in, sorry, say again. So
you had a note earlier on in one of the slides that
yes,
there were inefficient outcomes. I just was curious what this meant.
Yeah, sure, no worries. So what it all I mean, it's probably a bit of a throwaway line, but essentially all it is saying is that where there is taste projection, so where individuals overestimate their preference alignment with others, an individual may adopt, or may adopt a product which they actually don't really enjoy. And so, it's I guess a wastage of their money. They don't derive as much utility as they would if they had, used that money on, the purchase of another video game. And I guess, that opportunity cost of, spending it on a product where they don't, gain as much utility from, as compared to if they listened to their own gut and adopted a game, which that they would enjoy. There's an opportunity cost there, and that would be the inefficient outcome from that.
Okay, thanks.
No worries. Are there any other further questions? No, cool. So I'll continue on. So let me talk a bit about the actual data itself, about the Steam platform. So for those who are unaware, Steam is an online platform that serves as a video game distribution platform, as well as an online social network. So it is the world's largest video game platform as well. This is in terms of both consumers and producers. So Steam has over 132 million active users at the moment, and over 34,000 games on the platform. And 47% of video game publishers worldwide sell their titles on Steam. Particularly, Steam is not it's not like a PS5 or Xbox or anything. It is solely or mainly for PC users. So for Windows PC, Mac, and Linux, and it also has a small Steam console as well. So this is just a brief image of what the Steam platform looks like. I hope. Can you see my cursor by any chance?
Yeah, I think we can move it on again.
Yeah.
Yes, can see it.
Cool. So the client itself, or the platform itself, you can sort of see that there's it recommends, a few games or like games that might be featured that you would like to purchase. It has essentially where you can access your games library, software that you might have, videos that you might have on Steam as well. You can search for certain games that you want to purchase, and you can browse different games by genre, by different categories, etc., etc. So it's a platform where you can go where you sign up to, and there are certain games that there are certain games on the platform. You can search for those games, you can buy them, download them, and then play them on your PC. So I mentioned these things before, and as I said, Steam users, once you've signed up to Steam and you've downloaded the platform, you can search for an individual game and buy it. Once you've purchased it, you download the game and you install it on your computer, and this includes both single and multiplayer games. So prior to 2018, Steam users were public by default. There were a relatively small number of users opted to set it private. This was only about 7% of the users, and so that's probably so out of the 108 million users that we had in our data set, about 7 million were private. We had the other 101 million were public. And Steam users are basically anonymous. You just have a username and avatar, so you don't really know who the person is. There's no information about a person's name, about their age, their location, etc., etc. But within the data that we do have information about each user, their game collection, so which games that they own, and the friends that they were, who they were friends with on the Steam network. And so this just shows an example of what the Steam network looks like when you add a friend. So you can see here in the top left where my cursor is, this is the person's username. It's just called Fates. And this is their avatar. You can see that they have, a few friends here. And essentially, if you want to add someone as a friend, what generally tends to happen is you might play a game, like an online game. You might meet someone online, you might get along with them, whatever it may be. And then what you would do is you would click add a friend, and you would send a friend request. And if that person accepts your friend request, then you become friends with them. It's very similar to Facebook, where the links or the friendship links are bi-directional. So once you send a friendship request or someone sends a friendship request to you, once that friendship request is accepted, you're both now friends. So the actual initial Steam dataset essentially it was between 2013 and 2014. A team of computer scientists scraped the entire Steam platform and they created a public dataset. This was done by O'Neill et al. And to do this entire thing, they had to scrape data for approximately 108 million users, which was the universe of Steam users at the time. And for each user, the data set includes the date of the Steam profile created, the amount of games owned by each Steam user, the friends of each Steam user, and the date since each of those users became friends, and the total play time for each game. So one thing to note is that the original O'Neill et al. Data, it does not contain information about purchase dates. So that's data that we augment ourselves in sort of constructing the panel data set. We have to augment that data and we have to scrape that data ourselves. So for each user, as I've already mentioned, for each user, the Steam data contains information about who they're friends with and the date since users became friends. So from this, we can construct two measures, given that we have the complete Steam network, who's connected to who at every given point in time. So what we first do is we first create a measure regarding an old friend. And what we do is we use the beginning of the connection between two users, create a dummy called old friend. It switches to 1 if two users have been friends for at least 52 weeks prior to the release date of a game that we're going to focus on, which is called Super Meat Boy, and it's 0 otherwise. And what we also do is we use the complete network structure prior to the release of Super Meat Boy, and we calculate the key player centrality for each user. So this key player centrality, for those who are not aware of network economics and network science, this uses a cat centrality. And what we do is we create a dummy called key player friend. If a player I's friend's key player centrality is within the 99th percentile or above, and it's 0 otherwise. So just to reiterate or to repeat that, we have, just for example, at a given point in time, we have the entire network of Steam users. And what we look at is, there are certain people who might be connected, who might be more well connected than others. Those who are quite highly connected and who are within the 99th percentile, with a high key player centrality, those are defined as key player friends. And both of these measures are calculated prior to the release of Super Meat Boy to maintain exogeneity. I'll talk about Super Meat Boy in a little bit. I'll get to that slide soon. Cool. So, as I mentioned before, we do not have information on purchases. We have, the ownership. We have, for each user, we have the number of games that they own and the different types of games that they own, but we do not know when they purchased each game. And that information was not available, in O'Neill at our data set. So what we do is we augment that initial data set, and we do it by scraping the Steam Web API to collect information about each user's achievements in a game. And so the Steam Web API is free and requires registration as a Steam user. And I guess, as I mentioned before, this is quite a, this project was quite a technically and data-heavy project. Essentially, what we had to do is we had to hit the Steam Web API. We had to create multiple Steam accounts, and we had to create a script to run multiple API queries for multiple accounts in parallel. So we had about 9 to 10 scrapers going at the same time, and it took, probably around a few weeks just to get the data itself. And so what we did is, using Steam ID and Game ID, we run a query for each user in game. And what that does, it allows us to collect the achievements for each user within each game that they have. And we use the achievements as a proxy for purchase date. And so why we can do that is achievements, they're essentially virtual rewards in a game. So, for example, for those who have played Super Mario Brothers, there's 8 worlds in Super Mario Brothers. If you beat the first world, you might get an achievement. And so that's essentially, once you reach a certain point in the game or you complete a certain task, you gain an achievement. In most games, players unlock achievements very early. So, for example, completing the game tutorial. And because players, generally speaking, unlock achievements very early in a game, the first achievement a player unlocks in a game can be used as a proxy for purchase date. That's why we use it. So, as I mentioned, like the API query is quite time consuming. It's only one player and one game combination per query. As I said, it takes a long time to be able to to extract all that data or download all that data. And so what we do is we focus on one game in our study, which is called Super Meat Boy. Now, Super Meat Boy is a play on words of Super Mario Brothers. Obviously, they have the same initials, SMB. For those, obviously, Super Mario Bros. I think is quite a popular game, and it's what you call a single player platformer where you run and jump, and the idea is to get through a whole bunch of levels, get to the last level, and beat it. In a similar vein, Super Meat Boy is very similar to Super Mario Brothers, except it's extremely challenging, and essentially. Super Mario Brothers is obviously developed by a huge corporation, Nintendo. Super Meat Boy is an indie game, and it's developed just by independent game developers. So it was developed by an indie team called Team Meat, which only had two individuals creating this game. So because it was developed by an indie developer, there was no major marketing campaign. There was no advertising, nothing. They just had to make the game, release it, and hope that it did well. So, I mean, to their fortune, like I said, there was no major marketing campaign, but the game became popular through word of mouth. It was priced at $15 US, and it is a single player game. And what we did, because this game is, it's an independent game, and it only became popular and had a huge amount of sales through word of mouth. What we wanted to do is we wanted to compare how this independent game compares to a major label or blockbuster single player game. So what we do is we look at we also collect the same data for a similar type of game. It's called Fallout New Vegas, but this was backed by a a much bigger corporation called Obsidian, who was a AAA developer in the video game industry. So essentially, after scraping all that data from the Steam Web API, after augmenting it to the O'Neill et al. Dataset, we have a final panel dataset for each Steam user and for each week from 2008 to 2014, which is how far back our dataset extends. There's over 48 million active users and 269 weeks. As I said, very technically and data-heavy project. For each user and week in the final data set, we have information about the first achievement or purchase date for Super Meat Boy. We have each user's friendship network and when they became friends with with the people they became friends with. We have the number of friends or the friends who purchased Super Meat Boy, and we have each users and their friends' key player centrality. So our study itself just analyzes a subsample of 89,000 or approximately 89,000 players and 154 weeks. And that's because out of the 269 weeks, we only focus from week 116 to week 269. Week 116 is when Super Meat Boy was released. And within our, within our study or within our analysis, we have a treatment equals 1. So a user is in the treatment if they have if any of their friends purchase Super Meat Boy. And obviously the post equals 1 in the week and after a player's friend has purchased Super Meat Boy. And just some caveats about the final data set. Both the outcome, so the purchase, whether an individual themselves purchase Super Meat Boy, and whether a friend purchases Super Meat Boy, so the treatment is very sparse. It doesn't happen that often. There's also no reliable demographic or geographic information about the user. So as I said, this is all on an online social network, or online platform. We don't have information about a person's age, geography, name, etc., etc. So obviously that's quite an unfortunate limitation of the paper. The other question is, or one of the other caveats that have been raised to us before is whether or not can we consider friends on Steam, like are they actual friends themselves as compared to maybe friends in other social networks like Facebook or Twitter or Instagram versus friends in real life. So that's obviously what actually defines a friend. And the other caveat is the data is a subsample where users who purchased Super Meat Boy and users who had friends who purchased Super Meat Boy were oversampled. And this is because obviously we're using a whole heap of data, and the purchase, a user purchasing Super Meat Boy, is a bit of a rare event. And so obviously those for users who purchase Super Meat Boy and friends who purchase Super Meat Boy, since there's not a whole heap of them, they had to be oversampled for the analysis. And just, I think this is a concluding just to conclude on the data, this is just some descriptive statistics of the data that we have available. So as I mentioned, there's about approximately 89,000 users, and we have like some other covariates on, the number of games that a person owns, the number of groups that they joined, their total number of friends, obviously the number of key player friends they have, the number of old friends that they have, etc., etc. And just to give an idea on, I guess, how Super Meat Boy was purchased over time, we can see that it was released, as I mentioned, in week 116. And in the first few weeks, I'll put my cursor over it, we can see that there's a huge, obviously a bit of an uptick in purchases. This is obviously to be explained by the initial release of Super Meat Boy, so people will purchase, obviously, at the start. The second big sort of purchase here, or like I guess cluster of purchases here, was to do with the release of Super Meat Boy on Mac and Linux. So originally it was just released on Windows PC, but then it was released later on Mac and Linux. So this sort of explains the spike here. And then a couple of the other small spikes are mainly just to do with sales promotions, such as the Steam Summer Sales and Steam Winter Sales. And just to have a look at the number of friends as well, most people on Steam have, just like one friend, and that's because maybe they don't like use Steam that often, or they've used it, they've barely used it. And it's sort of, you might have one friend, two friends, three friends, and then it's sort of, once you pass 5 friends, it's quite spread out. Some people might have, 20 friends. Some people might have 50. Some people might have 100. But, a large cluster of people on Steam will have less than 5 friends. Cool. Before I jump into the empirical analysis, does anyone have any questions on the data? Or any clarifications required?
Yeah, there's one question, Rhys, from Georgi.
Yeah, sure.
You're on mute, Georgi.
I apologize. Hello, Rhys. Thank you for the explanation. I was just quickly going to clarify. Are there any common characteristics that you can control for of the people that have a lot of friends? I would reckon those would be like Twitch streamers or somehow. Like, can you somehow match those individual names of those accounts to like maybe a YouTube or a Twitch page? Because that appears to be the common characteristic. I might think so.
Sure. Definitely a good point. It's something we have thought about and have considered. It's not something that we have done as yet, but so there is one other thing as well we could do. In some instances, people have linked their Steam account to their Facebook account as well. So that's something that we've like looked at doing, as well as looking at Twitch and YouTube. It's one of those things where we've received a few comments as well. I won't say it's the highest thing on the priority list, but it is something on our to-do list. So yes, we'll have a look into it and see how feasible that is. My initial gut feeling is that we'll be able to get a few. So maybe like for the key players, we'll get a few. But other than that, we won't get a whole heap. But it definitely is something worth looking into. Any further questions? Cool. I'll continue then. James, just very quickly, how am I going for time, by the way?
You probably got about another 20 minutes or so.
All right. Awesome. Cool. Cool. So I'll jump into the empirical analysis, and this will obviously a main aspect of peer effects, and then also I'll jump to the results. So with the empirical analysis, what we first, or I guess the roadmap for this is to look at the OLS and IV estimates of PFX in purchase decisions, and this is just the baseline. We also consider heterogeneity of PFX, as I mentioned before, between old friends and key player friends, and then we also look at PFX and play times, and PFX and play time, which is just engagement with the product. So essentially, this is sort of like the baseline model here. And I guess the main things, or the main two things to be note or to take aware of, is obviously the dependent variable, which is yit, and the independent variable of interest, which is yjt. So yit and yjt is a binary dependent variable or independent variable, indicating whether an individual I or j has purchased Super Meat Boy in week T or not. We also include individual fixed effects, alpha and wt for weekly fixed effects, and this is just a linear probability model. So whilst that's the baseline model, given that it is a peer effect model, there are definitely some challenges given that it's endogenous, that there are endogenous peer effects. So two key challenges to identification, as outlined by Mansky in 1993, correlated effects, which include both unobserved homophily and common shocks, and the reflection problem. So for those who are not well versed in this literature, unobserved homophily is, I guess, it's a challenge for identifying peer effects, because what unobserved homophily refers to is the old adage, birds of a feather flock together, which is that users tend to be friends with other users who are similar across many dimensions. And so, as an example, a player of indie jump and run games, which is what Super Meat Boy is more likely to be a friend with other indie jump and run enthusiasts. And so it might be the case that if you're friends with someone like that, your friend may purchase Super Meat Boy, but you may also purchase Super Meat Boy not because your friend purchased it, but because you both like indie jump and run games. But to address this, we use individual fixed effects, which takes into account, any of the, I guess, the consistent or constant preferences that an individual might have. The other correlated effect that needs to be addressed is common shocks. So this is a challenge for identifying peer effects because users may be exposed to the same shock, which drives a change in their behavior, and it's rather than through a social learning channel. So what this might be, for example, is two users who are friends, they might experience a shock in terms of there's a promotion on Super Meat Boy and it's been discounted, and so friend J might purchase Super Meat Boy, and then player I might purchase Super Meat Boy. But it's not because friend J purchased Super Meat Boy; it's because both player I and friend J were exposed to the same shock, which was a discount in the price of the price of Super Meat Boy. And we address this through weekly fixed effects. And now I'll talk about a bit of the reflection problem. And to address the reflection problem, we use an IV strategy. And so our IV strategy adapts Brumley et al.'s 2009 methodology. And so what Brumley et al. 2009 do, they exploit the network structure to estimate peer effects. And they use the characteristics of friends or second degree friends as an instrumental variable for J's consumption choice. So, for example, so there's a player I. She has a first degree friend player. She has a first degree friend J, and J has a friend K. And so I is friends with J. J is friends with K, but K is not friends with I. In that sort of structure, Brumley et al. Showed that you can use the characteristics of K as an instrument for J's consumption choice in estimating peer effects. So this is done under a cross-sectional setting. However, given that we have a panel setting, because we're limited in the terms of characteristics that we observe, given the limitations in data, we use the Super Meat Boy purchase decision of friends. So this is the Super Meat Boy purchase decision of friend K in T-1 as an instrumental variable for J's purchase decision. So it's a very similar methodology, but because we have a panel setting, we can use the outcome variable, so the S&B purchase decision, but when you use it at t-1, it's exogenous, and so we use that instead of the characteristics of friends as used in Brumley et al. 2009. So this is what what I've just explained. This is what the IV first stage looks like. So we want to estimate, YJT, which is obviously, the endogenous regressor. And we use the instrument YKT-1, and that's a binary dependent variable indicating whether an individual K has purchased Super Meat Boy in week T-1 or not. Well, again, we obviously have the same individual fixed effects and weekly fixed effects. So why this IV strategy, or why this IV strategy holds? Obviously, the strength of the IV. If a player J's purchase decision influences player I's purchase decision, then obviously player K's purchase decision must have an influence on player J's purchase decision, or it's very likely that it does. And with the validity of itself, we only use second degree friends who are not directly connected with I, and they're only connected to I through J. And to avoid the reflection problem, we use the purchasing decision of K at T-1. So why we can't use the purchasing decision of K at time T, this is where the reflection problem comes in. If we use the purchasing decision of K at time T, we can't infer, or we cannot infer whether K influences J, who influences I, or whether it's I that influences J that influences K. So if you use the purchase decision of K at time T, you can't actually distinguish who's influencing who. But if you use the purchasing decision of K at T-1, we know that K's purchase decision, because it's a period prior to time period T, it's an exogenous purchase decision. Therefore, K must be influencing J, who then influences I. And so that's why the IV strategy, we think, is quite a strong one. So just some caveats, obviously, with the IV strategy. Obviously, IV only estimates a local average treatment effect. And players with second degree friends who also purchase Super Meat Boy are quite rare. So it's only a particular set of compliers. We do think that the strategy itself holds some internal validity, or has quite good internal validity. But of course, external validity, I guess, is another question altogether. So that's something, obviously, that's probably a limitation or weakness of the study. The other caveat that was brought to our attention is that unobserved localized shocks, which may increase game consumption, could also potentially confound the causal estimates. So, for example, players I and K may live in the same local geographic area and experience the same shock or shocks in week T. However, we do believe these are to be quite limited, especially given that during our time period, so between 2008 to 2014, Steam content was uniform across the platform. So it was only, post 2014 where, Steam started advertising and started, doing discounts and sales by a regional, on a regional basis or on a personalized basis. Prior to that, all of the ads, the sales were just uniform across the platform. And so the majority of the shock should be captured by weekly fixed effects. So just with the heterogeneity, with all friends versus key players, this just extends, model 1 by just having binary indicators for old friends and key players respectively. And so instead of just having one beta, we have beta 1, where we have like I said, a binary interactive with a binary indicator for old friends. Beta 2, and there's an interaction term that comes for key players. The other empirical strategy, or the other part of the empirical strategy, is regarding PFX and playtime. And so this is the equation that we have to estimate, I guess, how PFX influence playtime. So playtime for individual I is a log num of hours that a player I spent playing a game, so Super Meat Boy. Essentially, we have an interaction term for the purchase decision and whether it was an old friend. And so essentially, yeah, this interaction term denotes if the initial friend who purchased the game was an old friend or not. In a similar vein, we have an interaction term for key players, and it denotes if the initial friend who purchased the game was a key player or not. We also have a vector of player I specific covariates, the total number of games owned, the number of groups joined, etc. And due to data limitations for PFX and display time analysis, we can only infer a correlational analysis. And so the reason why this is the case is because we only have playtime at a cross-sectional level. So if you notice within the equation itself, there's no parameter for time for t, so for time. This estimate is only done, or this estimation is only done at a cross-sectional level. And it's also why we can include this vector of player I specific covariates, because all of the covariates that we have are just at a cross-sectional level. Unfortunately, at the panel level, we don't have any strong covariates that we can use within the regression equation. Cool. Are there any questions on the empirical analysis, or should I jump into the results?
Probably jump on, I think.
All right, cool. So I'll just jump into it. So this is the baseline, or I guess the summary table for the baseline results. So we do an OLS and a reduced form just as a comparison, and we sort of show, or we sort of see that under an OLS, if friend J adopts Super Meat Boy, it increases the probability of purchasing Super Meat Boy by about 7%. When we do it, using an IV, that reduces to about 1.7%. So, I mean, like obviously there's, with OLS and IV, there's always going to be a bit of a discrepancy. That's something that we will look into in the next iteration of the working paper. But one thing to note is across all the specifications, the estimates are statistically significant at the 1% level. And so, yeah, we do see essentially the takeaway from this table is that, under our preferred specification, which is the IV specification, an increase, a friend purchasing Super Meat Boy increases, a player I's adoption of Super Meat Boy by 1.6%. So this is again shown in this graph here. As I mentioned earlier, we look at Super Meat Boy, which is developed by an indie developer. We also look at Fallout New Vegas, which is developed by a blockbuster company. Similar to Super Meat Boy, when a friend does purchase Fallout New Vegas, a player's product adoption for Fallout New Vegas also increases as well, and this increases by 0.021, 2.1%. Oh, sorry, 2.3%. Yeah, this just summarizes what I just said. If it's Super Meat Boy, if a friend purchases it, it increases by 1.7%. If it's Fallout New Vegas, if a friend purchases it, the probability of purchasing Fallout New Vegas increases by 2.3%. When we look at old friends versus key player friends for Super Meat Boy, we see that old friends what really drive the results here as compared to key player friends, and I don't think this is I don't think these results are contentious, given that old friends are probably going to know you a bit better. It's likely that you're going to think that an old friend is, if they purchase a game, that you're likely to like it as well. And so if an old friend purchases Super Meat Boy, there's an increase in the probability of purchasing Super Meat Boy by over 1%, 1.1%. and if it's a key player, it's by 0.5%, I think. For Fallout New Vegas, very similar type results. Obviously, magnitudes change slightly, but we see a very similar result to what's happening with Super Meat Boy. We also do a few robustness tests, and so obviously I mentioned before, like under the baseline, if a friend purchases Super Meat Boy, it increases the probability of purchasing Super Meat Boy by 1.6% or 1.7%. If we include players who signed up to Steam after the release of Super Meat Boy, this changes the magnitude changes is quite small, becomes 1.9%. And where we exclude weeks with large volume sales, so for example, the initial Super Meat Boy release weeks, the Super Meat Boy release on Mac and Linux, etc. This changes, the magnitude changes even smaller, and both of these are statistically significant as well. Cool. The final set of results to showcase is, I guess, in terms of the playtime. And so, as I mentioned earlier, this should be taken with a word of warning or a bit of a caveat, given that it's correlational and we can't infer causality from it. But what we do notice when we do, or what we do find from the analysis, is that actually, when a key player friend purchases Super Meat Boy and an old friend purchases Super Meat Boy, it doesn't actually impact the amount of playtime for Super Meat Boy for player I. But when player I is not influenced by a key player friend or an old friend's purchase, they tend to play much more compared to those who are influenced by their friends. And so this finding, and this is for Super Meat Boy, and it's the same. It's pretty much the exact same for Fallout New Vegas. And this finding, as I alluded to earlier at the start, we think is quite a good finding, or quite a unique or distinct finding, given that it seems that the fact that people might be influenced in terms of their adoption decisions by their friends or their peers. However, this may not lead to further engagement in the product itself. Rather, if a person is not influenced by their peers and they're just listening to their gut, they tend to get more utility and will tend to engage more with the product as compared to as if they were influenced. So to conclude, and hopefully, sort of on time with this and try to aim for about an hour, we studied, this paper studied peer effects in the adoption of experience goods. And in the case or the context that we used, we looked at, I guess, a computer game mainly focused on a computer game, called Super Meat Boy, which is an independently developed computer game. We use a novel individual level high frequency panel data set on video game purchases and online networks. We showcase, and I think with a strong empirical strategy, that peer effects strongly influence the adoption of experienced goods. And those peer effects are stronger if they come from old friends compared to, expert influencer or key player friends. We also find that the engagement with the game is significantly longer if the purchase is not influenced by a friend. And so, as I've already reiterated before, these findings suggest that individuals are likely to influence by their friends in relation to product adoption decisions, but product engagement decisions, particularly in the case of a single user experience good, are best decided by the user themselves. That's it from me on the presentation. I hope you enjoyed, and happy to take any questions.
Great, thank you very much, Rhys. That was a really interesting talk. I am just going to give you a round of applause on Teams. I think it was. I mean, you mentioned at the start you were a bit concerned that this wasn't a sport, but you've had an increasing number, I'd say, of esports talks at sports economics conferences in recent years and a number of talks in this series as well. So that's part of the reason why I was really interested in your paper and invited you to give a talk. So thank you very much for a really interesting talk, especially on, I guess, on the role of influencers as well. You've pretty much stuck to time perfectly. Thank you for that. And so we've got lots of time for Q&A. So if anyone in the audience would like to ask Rhys a question or provide a comment, please do raise your hand and go ahead. Okay, get on.
Yeah, I'm happy to ask questions. So I have 2 questions.
Sure.
One is, you can hear me okay? First of all, just make sure.
Yes. Yes.
Okay. So my first question is, the nature of the game is interesting because I'd imagine that people who join games as friends are likely to join games where you have like team playing
Yes.
versus individual games. So if I'll give an example. I play Fortnite with my son.
Yes.
And because of that, I have an interest in staying friends for longer. And he has, he adds more friends as he goes because he has his friends playing. And therefore, there's also an interest in playing the game for longer, perhaps, etc. So my first question is, what do you think in terms of the nature of the game? How does that impact perhaps the results that within the world of esports? My other question is, outside of esports, can you think of an example where these methods would be applicable to sort of identify similar trends? So esports offers sports, as we know, people who do sports econ and studies, we think of sports as good examples of studies. So how would you take the results from your study and translate them beyond the world of esports?
Sure. So I'm just jotting these down, and I will get back. So from study, cool. Thanks for the question, Gideon. So good question about the nature of the game. Probably something, I'll probably, as I sort of present this paper a bit more, I'll try and get across and clear up a bit more. So one of the reasons, and I think we've mentioned this explicitly in the paper itself. So one of the reasons why we look at single player games is exactly for the reason you just discussed, Gideon. So with multiplayer games, it's especially something like Fortnite, Call of Duty, Halo, anything that's where you sort of join an online server and you play with a heap of people. It is quite likely that for those type of games, your friends will influence your purchasing decisions. They'll influence your product engagement decisions. That's a given. But for single player games, it's actually sort of a bit of a toss up. Like it's actually we're not actually too sure whether for single player games your friends have an influence on your product adoption decisions or your product engagement decisions. And so that's why we focus mainly on single player games, because we want to see, for these type of games, whether or not, your friends are influencing your adoption decisions, whether they are influencing your engagement decisions. So that was, actually, when coming up with the idea, that was part of it. So to the question, I guess that you're saying, the nature of the game, like obviously, definitely matters. And we want to explore, particularly, does this occur within single player games? And I think like our results are like, it's a cool finding to say, hey, adoption decisions do occur within single player games. But it seems like in terms of engagement decisions, peers or friends are not that influential. So that, that would be the summary, I guess, of the findings. To your second question, about methods in other contexts and applying the results of the study in other contexts. I guess this is something I'd probably, if I'm to be honest, I'd have to think about a little bit more. I mentioned that I think the internal validity of the sorry, I'm losing my words. It's a bit late here. The internal validity of the study or the empirical strategy, I think, is quite, is quite strong, especially in terms of the, the product adoption side of things. But the external validity is probably something that's it begs the question, how externally valid these results are. Yeah, I guess like we could, I mean, like in any other experience goods market, or any market where you have, it's an experience good, and you have and you can have multiple people joining. So like you have a social network around it. You can apply it to that. I'd have to consider. I'd have to think about where what would be another appropriate place to do so though. I wouldn't be able to tell you off the top of my head. Sorry.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Gideon. Any more questions and comments? I guess I'll add a few kind of semi-related comments. I mean, I guess the first thing is I think you kind of mentioned it, which was, your results kind of, I guess, cast a little doubt on the idea of this influencer type strategy that lots of companies employ, obviously for promoting goods. I mean, I guess, does it necessarily, because I don't know whether you necessarily want to, you just want to get your goods out there, don't you, rather than necessarily, deep engagement with them, perhaps. I mean, do you think your results have that broader applicability for the kind of that influencer style marketing approach?
Yeah, so good question, James. So I guess like with this, I would probably say, so given the nature of the good, like that it's an experience good, and it's something that's a bit more like it's a bit more personal. So it's about like personal utility, and it's sort of continued engagement. I think that's the important thing. A lot of PFX, especially regarding product adoption, has not looked at least as far as we're aware, has not looked at product engagement. It's always been just adoption decisions. And video games is a very particular type of experience good because it's continuous. So like people talk about experience goods like for example, movies or like listen to music or whatever. But it's like games you can consistently play. And so this idea of like having this influencer type thing, like I would say, to answer your question, James, it's like I think in certain markets where if you're just buying a product and it's not an experience good, you just like I don't know, say an influencer might be something like a Kylie Jenner. She might promote something like I don't know, some skincare, some moisturizer or something. You might be able to get that, and you might be able to for those type of products, this influencer type strategy might work. But I think for something that's a bit more long term, where you need constant engagement, where that sort of strategy will not work. And I think that's what our paper sort of shows as well. Like this is not, if you're gonna look at something like a market for video games, do not do this. This isn't the right strategy or marketing strategy.
Yeah, but I think I also wonder a little bit about I'm thinking a little bit about how this applies to, I guess, that nature of things being viral and I guess products being sold and so on. The thing that springs to my mind is obviously different context, but the the idea of, I guess, superstardom in musicians and things like that, where one of these models is this kind of Adler type model of superstars, where you get some kind of utility from sharing the fact that you like this music, and therefore you all like this music, even though that music's not necessarily any better than any other music. And so there's that kind of peer effect. Versus, I can well actually understand that there's something there about you going yourself and finding something yourself. That satisfaction. I can remember that when I was a kid and I was choosing computer games or choosing music. You find one that's really good and you found it yourself. You've got that sense of satisfaction that you've got from having done that, and you go away and you just play it by yourself. Obviously, games are very different these days, but there must be something there, I guess, in terms of how things become popular and viral.
Yeah. So good, yeah, good question. To your point, so for example, like Super Meat Boy is sort of that game that you said you sort of like discovered, and it was sort of like a hidden gem type thing. Super Meat Boy actually was that. So, and it's all part of the reason, like in terms of the nature of the game that we talked about before, as with Gidon's question. The reason why we focus on that is because it was a game where it was developed by some indie developers. It was by two guys. No marketing, no hype, nothing. They just had to release it, or they put a lot of work into it. They want to release it, and the amount, people just started playing it, and just by word of mouth, it just started going like this, you know. And so that sort of satisfaction of have you heard about this indie game? Have you heard about this? Like people discovering that has probably led to people discovering themselves obviously led to that popularity. But the fact that it was something that was a bit more underground, a bit less mainstream or whatever, and then finally taking off like this, probably helped to the contribution of its popularity as well. And I think that what would I say? This is why, like I said, part of the reason why we chose to explore it, why we thought it would be a good context, a good case study. Yeah.
And just a kind of a little bit of a follow on from Gidon's point is, I guess to help me understand things, with my son, he plays Roblox, which, as I understand it, is also a kind of a platform, but obviously I guess quite different from Steam. Steam looks like it's a bit more of a, I guess, games they're organized. Maybe there's some level of, I don't know, moderation, whatever. Roblox seems like a similar type platform, but obviously, I guess, different. I don't know. I don't know whether it is similar in any sense to Steam at all. Whether you've got any familiarity with it.
I don't particularly, unfortunately, a bit too old for Roblox, but
Me too,
at
exactly.
least from what I understand, James, Roblox is just a single, it's like a single entity in of itself, whereas Steam is it's a digital video game distribution platform. So it's like Steam has, there's 34,000 different games on it, so you can jump on. Once you sign up, you jump on, you're like, cool, these are like 34,000 different titles. Maybe you want to play this, and this, so you go and you purchase them and then you download them. Whereas Roblox is just at least from what I understand, someone else may correct me, it's just one game in of itself. You play it, online community, and from what I understand, you spend a lot of money as well. From what I've
Trying
heard,
to avoid that, but I mean, I think I think now I understand it a bit better. The idea is that obviously Steam works where you pull the games off, and I think Roblox works where you have different games on it, but I think you play them all on the platform, don't you? You're kind of on the website interface rather than doing things distinctly. But Gidon, maybe you're a bit more of an expert on these things than either of us.
Far from it. I just play Fortnite with my son. He tells me about all these other games, and I'm like, okay. So I have a question, and I don't know if maybe I missed this, and I'm going to relate this to what Georgie was asking earlier.
Sure.
Are there any, in terms of a timeline, do you have a timeline showing when users joined to notice if perhaps there was a major event or intervention of some kind that caused more people to go on? So was there we'll call him a celebrity or influencer perhaps, that joined the game at some point, that may started of posting it on the YouTube channel, that might have caused more people to suddenly join at a given time, that would not have naturally occurred without that intervention?
Yeah. Okay. We could, to be honest with you, we could. It's something that we could look into. Not something I'd be able to just say, just pull it out here it is and showcase it to you. But definitely something we could definitely extract, or with little bit of additional analysis, could find out. I would like to think, obviously, if it's an expert, or it's a key player influencer that has done this, and obviously they have a heap of friends, then obviously that could lead to a lot of what would I say, a lot of additional purchases, which may not, to some degree though, that would be captured if it was a key player that did it. and they sort of like did it like with their like Twitch or YouTube or whatever it is, then arguably to some degree that's like part of the key player friend peer effect in any case, because you've seen that they've purchased the game. But if it's so, just to clarify that even further, we can look into like as you said, get on like if there's been like a huge uptick like in the number of people like say like jumping on or like purchasing Super Meat Boy, and identify we can look at where there were spikes in like the increase in number of Super Meat Boy purchases. Have a look and see what that might be like correlated to, or what that might relate to. So in the presentation, there are a few spikes that I mentioned where it's like there's the initial release, then it gets released on Mac and Linux, and then there's stuff where it's like Steam has a summer sale and a winter sale, and we know like obviously we can't for sure like empirically say we know this is the exact cause, but because the timing aligns to this event occurring and this spike in Super Meat Boy purchases, obviously it's for very good reason we believe that it's those events that are causing the increase. So like I said, we can do a little bit more analysis on that, and we can look at whether it's a key player who's jumped on YouTube or Twitch and something like Video Game Donkey or something like that, who's promoted it, and see if that's led to a spike. But like I said, that will require a little bit of additional analysis.
Thank you.
Thanks, get on. That makes me think, actually, noted the format of this question, but you mentioned the price earlier on, $15 or $18 or whatever in sales. Do you have information on these prices of the different games?
Yeah, we do.
I don't know, is that useful information? Have you made use of that in any way so far, or do you think it might have any use?
Yeah, so with the so I guess if there might be some like additional analysis to do. We really want to dive into it. We like, because we have weekly fixed effects. Like most of these things occur like at a weekly level, and so any changes in prices, they're accounted for. And given, as I mentioned in the presentation, that the changes, like say like in price discount, like in discounts and prices or whatever, like say there's a promotional sale, during the analysis time period, it was uniform across Steam. So it didn't matter, like, if I was in Melbourne and I had a friend who was like in America, or a friend who was like in Kazakhstan, everybody would get the same like promote, like, if there was a promotional sale, everybody would see it and be the exact same drop. So, like weekly fixed effects should capture all of that. If we wanted to dive into things a little bit more, and there might be some additional like type of analysis to be done, then potentially we could do that. Another project like that I'm thinking about, or that I've talked about with a couple of people at Monash, is a little bit different to this, but regarding actually pricing strategies as a network expands. And so obviously not related to this, but like just that, like just sort of a tangential answer to your question, James. Price data, like within this sort of context, can definitely be used to explore a whole heap of different things, especially IO related stuff, pricing strategies, etc., etc.
Yeah. We got time for one more question before we allow Rhys to finally go to bed. Any more questions and comments? Okay, well, in which case, thank you very much, Rhys. That was a really interesting talk. Thank you so much for being willing to join us at such a ridiculously antisocial hour for yourself. So thank you very much for that. As I mentioned at the start, we don't currently have a talk scheduled for next week. That was because I had a commitment that I no longer have. So if anyone has a paper they'd like to present, please do get in touch. And unless no one does jump in, we will return again in 2 weeks' time on January the 24th, when David Castells-Quintana will present Club Football and Economic Dynamism, a regional analysis for Europe. So wish you all a great weekend and a productive week ahead. Thanks once again, Rhys. Thanks, everyone. See you all soon.
Thank you, James. Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Cheers, Rhys.